extend the Q&A a little bit. Why am I here? I'm from the Knights of Columbus. I'm an attorney for their public policy office. The Knights were a large Catholic fraternal organization. We have a large charitable arm, and we use that to kind of do good in communities at the state level and also at the national level. And so I work for the national office. We have a policy mission here in Washington, D.C. And since the refugee crisis unfolded as a result of the attacks of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, we've had a robust response to that. That's had two pieces to it. The first piece would be our fundraising humanitarian effort. And since then, through a website called christiansatrisk.org, we've been able to raise over $10 million for those efforts. During this season of Lent, we're also doing an additional campaign, $40 for Lent. So if anybody wants to look that up on Twitter, that's just a way to encourage people to reach into their pockets a little bit and help the refugees over there. In addition to that, we've had a policy piece to our advocacy there, and that is to advocate on behalf of the plight of the Christians over there before our government and also before the general public. That has been my focus over the past few weeks because I don't know how well covered it is. It's been the only thing I've been working on lately, so I'm not sure how much it's filtering out into the general public, but there's a debate going on right now within the administration and Congress about whether folks in that area of the world are experiencing genocide, and if so, who? It seems like there is consensus that the Yazidi population has experienced what can be formally classified as genocide. The big question mark are the other minorities, the other biggest one being the Christians. The reason that there's any controversy, there is always a political question to the designation of genocide. And so even if you meet a legal definition, there may be policy concerns or political concerns that override the legal question. But there's also a legal question. It's not a word that you want to throw around indiscriminately. And so the lawyers at the State Department are trying to determine whether this legal definition, which you find in the UN Convention on Genocide, is being met. That legal definition has two parts. It has the mental part, the mens rea. We intend to destroy this group. And then it also has the actus reus, and that would be, there are several things you can do to enact genocide on a population. Killing them in mass with that intent is one of them, but also kidnapping without any word of where those people are, rape, bodily harm, and mental anguish intended to destroy the group are all things that would count as a question of genocide. And as part of this effort, the Knights did our digging, and we found that the genocide in Darfur is a precedent for encouraging the State Department to make this designation as the genocide is unfolding. I don't know how many of you remember, but in 2004, Colin Powell, he came out in the midst of the Darfur genocide, and he named it a genocide. And that's the first time the U.S. State Department has ever done that. And so we took a look at the process that they used in order to make that designation. They sent teams out there. They used a formalized form to ask the victims what they experienced, and they got identifying information. You know, what's your name, where are you from, what's your age, who are your family members. And so, with that in mind, it's because of what we know, the Knights of Columbus, by working with the refugee population over there, it's our belief that genocide is occurring for Christians, but we need the evidence in the right form for the State Department. So we sent a team over there actually last week. I was part of it, and I just got back at the beginning of this week. And we went into the refugee population and we asked them what they experienced. And the interesting thing is the priest who was serving as my translator, he said repeatedly, we haven't been focusing on what happened to these people. What we've been focusing on since the summer of 2014 is getting a roof over their head and getting them food and getting their children in school. And the population themselves, they've been traumatized and they haven't been ready to talk about these things. But now, going out, we've really uncovered quite a lot. And I noticed many of you were at the last, the political Islam discussion, and so we have the 30,000-foot view, and so what I hope to impart is, what it looks like on the ground. So we have radical jihad and radical Islam. What is the MO of a group like ISIS? And what we found is pretty interesting. In the beginning of the summer of 2014, one of Iraq's largest city, Mosul, was taken over by ISIS. From there, they moved to two or three smaller Christian towns on the outskirts of Mosul on the Nineveh Plain. And interestingly, many people fled from Mosul to these towns. There'd be Karakush, Bartala, and a few others. And so they occupied Mosul, set up there, and then in August of 2014, they moved into these smaller towns that were predominantly Christian. And Karakush is just the best example because it was more populated. But on the 6th of August, they rained mortars on the town. And that succeeded in killing 2 children and a woman. That the Christian community took as their signal to get out of there. And fortunately, they did that because we would have a much larger crisis on their hands. But tens of thousands of people took to their cars and by any means possible got out and headed to Erbil, also on the Nineveh Plain, which has a protected kind of sheltered Christian neighborhood. So a trip of 30 kilometers took many people over 10 hours, 12 hours, some people over 24 hours because checkpoints shut down. To go just 30 kilometers, about 18 miles. But there was a population that was left behind. They were the old, they were those who couldn't figure out a way to fit into one of the cars. There were some who said, I'm not leaving because ISIS is coming. I'm going to stay. They can't tell me what to do. And there were others who sort of just thought, they'll come, the army will drive them back out. It's going to blow over in another couple weeks. And so beginning on the 7th of August, people were waking up and they saw there was nobody in the streets. And they became afraid. Some people holed up in their house and did that as long as they could until the food ran out. Yes?
I just didn't hear what you said. You said on August 6th, rains or something.
Mortars. Yeah, mortars. Another. Yeah, sorry about that. Mortar fire. And so they woke up. They holed up inside of their houses, and they tried to stay there as long as the food would last. Over time, ISIS figured out which houses contained Christians, and they would come to those houses 3 or 4 times a day. They would say, "Convert to Islam or die," and they would do this with guns pointed at their heads, swords at people's necks. They would harass them for a period of time. And if the people refused to convert to Islam, they said, "All right, give me everything you have, all your money, all your gold, everything." They tore the diapers off of little children, that sort of thing, to make sure nothing was hidden in them. And then they would leave, and then they would come back several times a day. Interestingly, at the beginning of the day, they would bring food after morning prayer. It was the food that they stole out of all the abandoned shops, and it was not enough to sustain people. After about 2 weeks, something happened. Maybe ISIS realized that they didn't want to keep feeding these people, or who knows what it was. But they began to round these people up, convert to Islam now, or, come with us. And so they found a central location in Karakush. There were at least two that we were able to discern. One was a hospital, and one was a house near the hospital. They brought them to the central place. They separated the men and the women. And the men they would subject to beatings, starvation, and this is the middle of the summer. It's about 110 degrees out. And they would deprive them of water, saying, convert or we're going to kill you. Swords to the neck, guns. To the women population, they would threaten them with rape. They wouldn't be necessarily so physically violent, but they would point guns at them, and they would brandish swords and say, you must convert or you're going to die. And repeatedly, I guess they took shifts. They grabbed everything they could, but over time they took every single piece of jewelry, every document, everything from this population. And interestingly, these crowded situations in these central locations, they would go on for a couple weeks. And I wanted to tell briefly the story of one woman. She was among the women in one of the houses that they found. She was older. There's nothing remarkable about her if you look at her. But when ISIS went up to her and said, convert or die, she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. You have your faith, I have my faith. You have the Quran, I have the gospel. That's just the way it's going to be. And for that, she was beaten. But she was also noted as a leader among the other women. And so the men were still nearby, and the men insisted that the wives and daughters stop talking to ISIS and talk through this woman. So she became kind of the spokesperson as well. And so they would go to her and say, these women must convert. And she says, well, then you need to talk to them. But as for me, I'm going to stick with my faith. And she was repeatedly hit with the butt of a gun for that. I'll speak about the next phase, but when the next phase came, some were able to escape. When this next phase arrived at her population, they said to her, everybody can go except you and a few others. And they brought her to a room with the emir. And the emir himself put a sword to her neck and a gun to her head and said, you must convert or you're going to die. We're going to put your head on this platter, or there's translation. I don't know if she said the platter they put out in front of her, or your back. Because if we kill you, all of us will be assured of paradise. And reading between the lines, it's because she made such a strong stand on behalf of the women. She physically fought them when she saw that they were trying to carry off some of the younger girls. And so what she did in response was she just began to pray the Our Father. And at that moment, the emir received a phone call. And I guess he put down his gun or his sword, and he picked it up and walked away. I guess he got a call an order to stand down, and she was allowed to go. But I couldn't believe, just a little 6-year-old woman, and I couldn't believe the courage that she displayed. I wanted to tell her story. The next phase consisted of these groups of Christians being taken to a bus, and the ISIS would find the beautiful women, some of the younger men, if they're military age. They took one doctor that was known well, because he could be of service to ISIS. The older folks, they were all put on a bus, and they were driven out into the middle of the desert, and they were left there. Fortunately, it was usually close enough to a road that eventually they ran into somebody, or they walked in the heat 8-10 hours to the nearest Peshmerga checkpoint. Along the way, a few people died, but for the most part, the groups looked out for one another. Even as the sick were falling in the desert and dogs were circling, they made sure that everybody got to where they needed to go. And as for the folks that ISIS or Daesh thought were desirable, for the most part, we haven't heard much. In one case, one woman was allowed to use her cell phone, and she made a few calls out. I guess it was a courtesy by the ISIS member. But over time, it became clear that she had been captured because she was to be an ISIS bride. And eventually the calls stopped, but before then, it was clear that the emir, who already had a wife and children, also took her as kind of a prize for their war or booty or whatever term you want to call it. So all this information that we've gathered, we're trying to now move back to the State Department and say, look, we have the evidence of the killings. We have the evidence of the rapes. We have the evidence of the forced conversion. We have it firsthand. It's not secondhand from the media. It's now time to recognize genocide for the Christians. And if we're all infidels now, I would encourage you to visit our website, stopthechristiangenocide.org, and you can add your name to a petition that we'll be delivering to the State Department next week. Congress is poised to make their own declaration, but we also need the State Department to speak in unison. And what will it do? There are a number of things. It will build momentum for a more robust humanitarian response. It will provide legal justification for restitution and for greater recognition of rights of the people who have been oppressed. But the thing that really drove it home for me was from the perspective of Iraqi Christians, this is just the latest in a long story. It began for them in 1915. There was another incident of mass murder in 1930, another in 1960, and this latest chapter in this book, I guess you could say, began in 2003 and is just capped with ISIS. This is just the latest form that this latest genocide has taken. And you know, it was actually an archbishop who said to me, you know, the genocide designation is important because if we don't have our rights recognized now, this is going to happen again in 20 years. And we're now facing, not as hyperbole, we are actually facing a situation where all the Christian communities that predate Islam, that are some of the oldest Christian communities in the entire world, they may disappear from Iraq. It's the population from 2003 to now has gone from 1.5 million Christians to about 250,000. And of the people who I interviewed, over half said, we're leaving this summer. There's no hope in Iraq for Christians. And if just my anecdotal evidence is correct, then I estimate another 25 to 30% of the Christians are going to leave the area this summer when the weather's good enough to do that. And so, Europe, yeah. The United States is also, on the list, but it's a lot, logistically, it's a lot more difficult to get to the United States. But yeah, that's the story, and so I'm opening up to questions. Sure.
What's the total population of Christians that are living in areas that are currently occupied by ISIS?
Yeah, that's diminishing quickly, but yeah.
What was it before it started?
Yeah. I'm more familiar with Iraq, and so the statistics there is 1.5 million, and now it's down to 300,000. Syria is a piece of the puzzle that I'm still getting to know a little bit better, but it's a similar story where the population is rapidly diminishing. Yeah. Yes.
With all this work that you're doing.
Yes.
And I applaud you for doing it.
Yeah.
Do you really think that this guidance that's the head of the State Department now and the one that we're trying to beat for president
Yes.
before, are any of those people going to listen to what you
Yeah. To your question,
Will actually do something, because I have no confidence in these people and they're ruining our country.
yeah. To your first question, I mean, well, to your second question, noted, and we will. But to your first question, all you could do is do the best you can. We know the type of information that they need, and if we have the evidence and it's in the form that they could use for legal determination, and they don't make that legal determination, we still have that information, and we could share it with others. And you know, I do know, and I can say that there are people within the State Department who are really working hard to make sure that all minority populations are being protected over there. It's just, you know, it's a problem with the lawyers, and standing over top of all of that are any political considerations, and we just got to do the best we can. Yep.
My question is, are the people, the Christians there, safe now? Are they in a zone that is protected militarily by the Kurds or by
Yeah.
other groups? And the second thing is, what is, I know the Pope has spoken out about this.
Yeah.
What is the Vatican doing?
Yeah, the Christians are relatively safe in a certain sense, that they're in an area that is relatively well defended in Kurdistan. Originally, they were also in an area that was to be defended by Kurdistan, but I think geographically this is just a safer place. In another sense, however, they're living in conditions that I think are kind of hard to imagine. You really have a room, you know, from here to the wall, about this size for a whole family to live in, and that's to do everything. And they're sharing, you know, bathroom and kitchen facilities. The sanitation, drainage, and all of that is not optimal. And they're living often in buildings that were to be built. The shell is there, but you know the project was abandoned, and they've moved into there, and they've kind of slapped together a living situation. Often, I mean, it's under the guidance of people who are really trying their best to help them, but you're walking through the halls in the middle of the day, and it's completely dark because there's no lights in the hallway. It's just the sunlight just kind of coming through, and so it's. I spoke to some of the doctors who work in the clinics there, and there's all sorts of, there's an increased risk for infectious disease and every other sort of thing. And what's happening to their mental state, it's just, like I said, there's no hope for us. We need to get out of this country. So, safe but not safe. And I'm sorry, could you remind me of your second question?
What is the Vatican?
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's a very powerful group of churches, very powerful.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I can't speak to that at this point because this became my baby just recently, and since then I've been very focused on the trip and everything, and that's one of the things that I need to get to know better, because they really do have some levers to pull, and they could really play an active role. But I don't want to speak out of turn on that. So, any other questions or anything? Sure. Okay.
Just one quick one.
Start with one.
Are most of the Christians there Eastern Orthodox Christians, or are they Catholic?
Okay. They're divided up into several groups. I was there. I was hosted by the Chaldean Catholics. There's Syrian Catholics. There's a Syrian Orthodox, Chaldean Orthodox, and as far as the numbers are broken down, I'm not sure. The people who I was with were mostly Chaldeans, but we also met with the Syrian Catholics as well. But our overall efforts are ecumenical. We're trying to help all of them. Yeah. Anything else? Again, I apologize for not being Miss Hirsi Ali, but I hope this was informative. And please please, as you head back, and you interact with your local party, yeah, I'll ask you. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, but as you interact with your local parties, with your candidates, please make sure that this is a priority for them. I mean, this is the politics can actually save lives here, and these are people who have been beaten down for the past decade and a half, and it's one of those situations where our efforts really can make a difference to people who are suffering.
Do you know what that woman's name was who was in that group? The one who
Yeah, I do. I don't want to give out. Yeah, I don't. It would be betraying a confidence because I just told them that these investigations would be just for investigative purposes.
Sometimes they're referred to as ISIL or DAESH.
Mhm.
Discuss the significance of calling them either one.
Yeah, ISIS describes the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and then ISIL would be Islamic State of blank and the Levant, which actually gives them credit for more territory, and then Daesh would be a slightly pejorative term that is what the people on the ground, the Christians, use. So in my reports, I use Daesh, I guess, after spending so much time with them. Mm-hmm.
What about the idea of the caliphate, and how does that factor into attracting more soldiers to ISIS?
Well, I guess the idea of a caliphate is that it rather than having a lust for a pure version of Islam and joining some militia somewhere, here's this group who is claiming that they are a state. They've been prophesied in the prophets and everything, and you're joining something big that's on the move. And I think there's just a mental benefit to there being the idea of a state with a head and with governors and a fighting force. Yeah. So the man at the head of it is al-Baghdadi is his last name, which just means he's from Baghdad. But yeah, he's the center, he's the leader, he's the caliphate, and the others are he's the caliph, I believe is the term, and then he's got governors and local leaders under him. 5 minutes. Yeah, there's another piece to this, and occasionally you see some commentary that would suggest that Christians get different treatment from other minorities because they're people of the book and they have the option of paying the jizya. On paper, that's true, and in the Nineveh Plain, we didn't have instances like you had with the Yazidis where they were rounded up by the hundreds and just machine gunned. That didn't happen to the Christians, probably because the Islamic State didn't have the opportunity because everybody left before they could. And I should mention that there's evidence now, mass graves, to suggest that this has happened in Syria. Okay, well, it almost seems like, all right, well, okay, Mr. ISIS, don't worry, I'll just pay the tax. How much do I owe you? The reality of the jizya, at least for the people in Nineveh Plain, is that it's an excuse for ISIS to take anything they want, including your daughter and your wife, at any time, for any justification or no justification. So we really have to militate against any idea that the Christians have it all right. They just pay a little bit higher tax. No, that's just not. I mean, we can't trust a group like ISIS to be to negotiate in good faith and administer something like the jizya in a just manner. It's just not happening. So, okay.
You said Congress was prepared to do something.
Yes.
They're going to make their own designation of
Yeah,
genocide?
it's a joint resolution. Right now it's in the House. It just passed committee yesterday or the day before. The resolution number is H-Con-Res 75. It's bipartisan. The original co-sponsors are Jeff Fortenberry and Anna Eshoo. There's over 200 co-sponsors. Make sure your congressman is on it. I'm happy to answer any other questions, but I think at this point we'll wrap it up. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.